Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I will get started. I'm Danielle. Good morning. I'm with Focus. I'm here today to talk about services. Stacey?
Stacey Holmes. I'm also on the King County HMIS administration team with Focus.
So our basic structure for today, we're going to do kind of a demo of the basics of entering services. We're going to then talk about kind of program-specific, funding-specific services, and then we're going to talk about service reporting. So that's kind of our flow today. If at any point you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand. For those of you who are attending online, please type in the chat any questions you may have. Yeah.
I recognize some of you as folks that have been to many of these trainings and we work with often because you're in that HMIS lead role. Some of you are new. We know that this training has a variety of different types of users of HMIS. Some of you are in there all the time. Some of you maybe not so much, and that's true for the audience online as well. So feel free to ask questions. Some of you may find some of the parts repetitive, and for some of you it'll be brand new. So we expect that sort of mixed HMIS use levels in these trainings. Also, if you haven't attended before, we always try to do these in person while we also have a remote audience at the same time. So we'll be pausing and trying to make sure that our remote audience questions get asked and answered as well, just for those of you who are brand new to any of these trainings.
So a little bit of background about why services matter. For some programs, the services are a critical part of telling both the client's story and your program story. For some programs, the services are actually part of the HMIS data standards, specifically thinking about night-by-night shelters and their midnight service, thinking about outreach programs and their outreach contact service. Federal funding, federal reporting is based on those services. For some of you, you have federal and local funders who require services, so like PATH has federal requirements around services, SSVF. Local funders like United Way have programs where services are part of how you get funding and how you demonstrate that you have served a client. One super beneficial thing about putting services in HMIS is that it helps document a client's history of homelessness, right? So if they're staying in your night-by-night program and they have a bed night, that goes towards documenting their homelessness status for any future housing resources. It also helps detail the type and frequency of support received by clients. So when services are entered, you get a fuller picture of the services you as a program have provided. And then some examples are the shelter bed nights, referrals received by the clients, case management time, and financial services. So some of you work for programs where entering the dollar amount that you spent for a client is part of the requirements for that program. So we're gonna do a demo of how to enter a service. We're also gonna do a demo of the attendance tool. This is kind of the step-by-step of entering a service. So first you search for a client or create a client if they're not already in HMIS. You enroll the client if they're not already enrolled in your program, and then you provide services to that client. So you want to find the specific service you're looking for, make sure your dates are correct. If you are working for a program that tracks dollar amount or the amount of time spent with the client, you want to make sure that those are entered correctly. And then if you're working with a household, you want to make sure that that service is linked to all of the appropriate members of that household. So, I am going to sit here, so I apologize if I can't actually see you. I'm going to go through some things. If you have questions, please feel free to stop me. Go for it.
Obviously, we're going to jump right into looking at the how-to in the software, and then we're going to back up a little bit and talk more about some of the other types of services. But you'll notice that when we're using that term, it's very specific to HMIS and the software. Obviously, as providers, we use that term a lot. We're providing shelter services, we're providing all sorts of different kinds of services in the community. When we're using the term, it's very specific and it's different than an enrollment in the database. So we're using that term to mean a piece of data that is entered into the system to track an activity.
So the first step is to look for your client. What I'm showing you here is our training database. All of the information is in here is fake. All of the clients we are showing you are fake. Oh. Did I come back? It looks like we had a momentary glitch. Am I back?
You're back.
Okay. So all of the information you're about to see is fake. First step, search for a client. The clients that you have last searched for will show up here. And then so you open up your client, you go to programs. If they're already enrolled in your program, it should appear here with the enrollment. If not, the available program should appear here. Hypothetically, let's say they're already enrolled. To provide a service, you want to edit that enrollment. You want to go to provide services, and you'll see all of the services that are available to your program specifically. So this one is an emergency shelter program. It has a bed night service, it has a navigation service, and it has a security deposit service. So bed night service is that attendance service, right, that you want to make sure that if you're working in a night-by-night shelter that you provide that shows that that person stayed in your shelter that particular night. When you are working with a household, if that household has additional members, you'll see group members listed here. If they both stayed, you want to make sure that this is toggled and submit. This date range, when you're providing a service, that this date range will default to today. So if you're providing a service that you actually gave a week ago, make sure you change both the start and the end date to be that date a week ago. So I want to change both of these dates to the 20th and submit. Some of the services you'll see actually have service items. So navigation actually gives me two separate options. So I have family navigation and single adult navigation. So I want to make sure that I pick the correct service and the correct service item. If it doesn't have a service item attached, it will just have that, or if it only has one service item attached, it will only give you that one line. So family navigation, for some case management services, you have the option of tracking the amount of time you spent with someone. So say yesterday I spent an hour and 15 minutes talking to Bruce Banner, but I didn't talk to Betty Ross. So say I just provided the service to the one person, I want to make sure that this is toggled off, and then I can provide a note and submit. One place I can see past services is I'm still within the enrollment. I click history. It shows me the history of enrollments provided. And if I provided a service note, it should appear here if I just hover over the speech bubble. One final type of service is a financial service. So for example, the security deposit, you want to update the expense amount. So let's say my deposit was $500. Some of you may be tracking expense amounts and may not be tracking fund source, and that's fine. So you enter the expense amount and no fund source. Some of you have expense amounts and you're supposed to select a funding source. So you can do that here, that drop down, and then submit. So that was a really, really fast overview about where to find services, how to provide services, and how to look at services that were provided in the past. Any questions about what I just ran through? Yes. So the question is, what do you do? We will be repeating questions just so our online audience can hear as well. The question was, what do you do when you accidentally enter a service incorrectly? The best, quickest, fastest way is to reach out to our help desk and say, this is the client unique ID number, this is the date, please delete this service, and then go in and enter the correct services.
You mentioned that there's an optional way to enter services and notes, and who has access to this information?
So the service notes are accessed only by people at your agency. So if the service will let you save without entering a note. So the notes are optional. So it's up to your program, to your agency, to your funder to decide if those notes are necessary, because it will let you save a service without entering a note.
You mentioned the navigation file, the type of stuff with the client. Is this an optional or is it required?
It is not a required field. Some case management services, so it's not tied specifically to navigation, it's often with case management. So if you have a program that has a case management service connected to that program, you have the option of setting it up so you can track time, but it's not a requirement. So it's an option, but not a requirement. Yes, so when they are looking at, so the question is about services and activity in HMIS. So when the analysis is done, it's done on whether or not a service was provided. It doesn't take into account how much time was spent with the client. So by entering that service, it should be acceptable. Yeah, a question here?
So our services specific to an agency and an agency fine?
Yes, so
cannot be changed.
yes, so services are specific to a program and are based and are determined, yes, by the agency. So if you have services that you have a funder that would like you to track specific services, please reach out to us and we'll ask you some questions about kind of the purpose behind the services and make sure that we set them up in a way that serves your agency best, but they are agency and program specific, with a couple exceptions that we'll talk about later when we talk about funding specific services. So there are some programs that have a very specific set of services that we don't have flexibility to change. And so we'll talk about those in a little bit. Yeah. Any other questions? Any questions online?
Yeah, so a similar question to Veronica's earlier question about what can be seen. So the question is, what is visible only to the program and what is visible to anyone using HMIS, particularly service notes and funding sources? So I'll reiterate that we are a COC-wide shared HMIS. So you should assume that any other agency can see everything except for notes, client level notes and notes within the program. Service notes are not shared, but they can be seen by anybody at your agency. They are not locked down per program. They are within the agency. So that's the only piece that's not shared. And hopefully, Carlos, that answers your question.
Any other questions here in the room? There are several different types of services that you can set up or have set up. So there's a long-term service, which is like case management or security deposit or rental assistance, right, where it's not tracking a daily occurrence or not necessarily tracking a daily occurrence. There are services that are considered daily attendance or multiple attendance services. So daily attendance services like a night-by-night shelter bed night or a day center attendance service. Multiple contact services or multiple attendance services are like your outreach contact services. So you can provide a service, that contact service, more than once in a day. Still, the step is to enroll clients. There's the option with attendance services, but only with attendance services, to provide it in the way I just showed you or in the way I'm about to show you, which is our attendance tool. For those of you that work for agencies or programs that have daily attendance or multiple attendance services set up, you will notice that you have access to this little option here called attendance. And what this does is it allows you to provide the same service to a bunch of clients at one time. So say in my emergency shelter, I want to provide a bed night. And I want to provide it to the 100 people that came into my shelter last night. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this date is correct. So I actually want it to be for tonight or for last night. And then you can search for the client And it will show you here Betsy Banner is not enrolled in my program, so I can't provide an attendance service until I enroll that person in my program. But Bruce Banner is enrolled in my program, and I can provide an attendance service for him for that evening. You also, this is the one and only place that you have access to delete things. So if you accidentally provide an attendance service to a client you do not intend to, and you are still in this attendance tool, you have the ability to remove that client from this one single place. So this is the attendance tool in a super quick overview. For those of you who see similar clients, this list right here will show you the clients from kind of the last 4 months. So if you have a client in the last 4 months that you have provided a service to, you can just skim through this list and add them again. Any questions or comments about the attendance tool? For those of you that work for outreach programs as well, this can be a super useful tool. So say you've done outreach in an encampment. All of these outreach contact services are set up as multiple attendants. So you can actually use the attendance tool. You can go through and say you saw 30 people that day. You can provide an attendance or a service for the client saying that that client is staying on the streets, emergency shelter, or safe haven for that day, and enter them all at once instead of opening each client, providing a service, opening the client, providing a service. You can do it here with the attendance. So it's a very handy tool. Any questions about attendance tools?
So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about more of what some of your questions are related to, because across all the different project types, shelters, outreach, day centers, are a variety of services. So we're focused on services, but we're touching on a lot of different types of projects. Just so you know, last 2 years, we have done training specific to street outreach and a training specific to night-by-night shelters. So we have those recordings on our website if that would be helpful to go back. Some of this same information is in there, but if you want to focus on a training specific to a particular project type, it might be helpful to go back and look at those as well. So I want to go through a couple of the different project types to highlight the specific services that are embedded underneath these project types. And again, the first layer of HMIS requirements comes from the federal government. All HMIS systems have to adhere to the HMIS data standards. And then underneath that are all the local standards. So some of these services, I'll try to identify those, but when you run reports that say, oh, this person, nobody is showing up in my shelter and I run a night-by-night shelter, that has to do with whether the bed night service is entered. So for bed night services, for night-by-night shelters, there is a distinction among shelters in terms of how HMIS and how we define those in the community of shelters that are typically high volume. The bed is not reserved that night for the person who had it the night before. And you're potentially checking in a lot of people every night and possibly a different group of people. Unlike what would be considered an entry-exit shelter, which does not require bed night service, which some of you might manage, which that bed, the expectation is that the person experiencing homelessness, the family, will be back in that bed the next night. So that bed is reserved for them. So that's just sort of a quick way of distinguishing. Your contracts might have further distinctions and requirements, but that's the quick way that we distinguish them in HMIS. So the night-by-night shelters have these bed night services that Danielle just demonstrated the different ways that we can enter those. And they are critical for making sure, and they're not only for your agency's occupancy rates to show and report, this is the percent of our beds that were occupied or our units that were occupied during a particular reporting period. But also, this is the way that clients are designated as homeless in the system. If they have an enrollment in your night-by-night shelter, but they do not have a bed night under that day, that is potentially a break in homelessness for them, according to the database. And so any reports that are gathering this data and saying this is a client that is literally homeless or potentially has the kind of history that you would define them as chronically homeless, is going to be looking for these kinds of services, going to be looking for bed nights. So that's why we want to call those out as a critical service for night-by-night shelters. Most of the time, we have this naming standard in Clarity that bed night services underneath your shelter will have the program name. So, it will say, Peter's Place, and then ES stands for emergency shelter, to say ES housing or just ES, but there will be an indication there that that's your emergency shelter bed night. Any questions about bed nights? We also refer to those as attendant services, shelter stays. Okay, so we'll talk about reports later. There are some reports, key reports that came off of this service that we're going to talk about later. So the same thing with day center attendants. Locally, as a community, we use attendance, day center attendance, as an indicator of activity in the system. So that's the way you can have an enrollment for a client for months, and maybe you're not seeing them. But as soon as you see them, an attendance, kind of like a bed night service, an attendance service can be entered. And that's an indicator that that client has activity at that day center. For us locally, for day centers only, it also keeps that client active. It keeps their enrollment from being automatically exited. Across the community, we have all day centers and shelters set up to automatically exit the enrollment at 90 days if there is no activity underneath there. So it's going to be looking for this service or any service underneath the day center. So the attendance service is the one that all day centers will get. Some day centers will also have other services like showers, meals, referrals, case management, a variety of other services, but everybody will always get an attendance service.
And the auto exit date will backdate to the date of the last service provided. That's you.
Okay, there we go. Any questions about day centers? Okay, great. So the outreach contact, so similar to the bed nights at night-by-night shelters, street outreach projects are required to document their contacts in HMIS. And according to the data standards, even if a client has an enrollment in a street outreach project, that in and of itself is not an indication of homelessness. Again, according to the database. So in order for somebody who has an enrollment in a street outreach project to be shown that they are literally homeless, if that is the case, there's this contact service. And the contact service is set up with not staying on the streets, or worker unable to determine. So when you have contact with somebody, those are the choices. And you might then be entering that person de-identified because you don't have enough information yet and you don't have consent yet. And we have a protocol for entering somebody de-identified. But that's as soon as you can get history for that person in the system, then the more chance there is of you having documentation for that person over time, especially if there's somebody who meets the definition of chronically homeless and therefore is eligible for projects and services for people who are chronically homeless. This A contact service is also available to night-by-night shelters. So night-by-night shelters may have a bed night service and or a contact service for a client. But most of the time we see them used in street outreach projects. And again, any of our, we have a few reports at the client level that look at chronic homelessness, and we're going to be doing a training in a couple months focused on chronic homelessness. And those reports definitely look for this contact service. Are there questions about this contact service? Okay. Outreach referrals. So if you have a street outreach project that is funded by the city of Seattle, there's additional locally required services that you'll see underneath your project enrollments in HMIS. These are referrals to authorized encampments and referrals to shelter. In addition to the contact service, which is required by every street outreach project. If you have a City of Seattle project, you'll see these. And depending on what your contracts require, you'll have different metrics that will look for referrals to encampments and referrals to shelter. And then the outcomes report, we have a custom Seattle King County program outcomes report in the system is programmed to look for these referral services. Since these are not part of the HMIS data standards at the federal level, these are local standards. Specific funding sources, so Danielle referenced this earlier. I'm not going to go deep into this. If you are a RIDE funded, TAP funded, Streets to Home or SSVF project, you're probably very aware that you have a very specific set of services that get set up with your project. I will pause and say that, and the RIDE, TAP, and SSVF, those are federally, they come to us, we follow the directions, we set them up, and then the report that gets submitted to the federal agencies that manage those, look for those services from the HMIS system. Streets to Home, that's local, that's United Way. That is one of the ways that diversion has happened in our community. Streets to Home continues to be set up as an individual project underneath agencies that have Streets to Home funding. And there's a standard set of services that goes with each Streets to Home project. And so some of those services are financial in nature and require that you put in a dollar amount and put in a note if that's necessary. Whoever you're talking to about your United Way requirements for Streets to Home would be how to know what types of things to put in each of those categories. But you can always reach out. We work with the Streets to Home projects all the time. We have sort of a cheat sheet for entering services for the Streets to Home projects. But that is specific to the United Way. Are there any questions? And they pull that directly from the HMIS system and look for all those services that are entered and reconcile the dollar amounts. Okay. Diversion services. So I know this is a hot topic for people. We have in this beginning since December, we have shifted the way that we are tracking diversion in HMIS. So some of you may be familiar with the fact that we used to track diversion under its own project. So Mother Nation might have its own diversion project. It would enroll clients underneath that project and may also have that client in another project and enroll them. The shift is that there is now a standard set of services that some of you may be familiar with that are being used across all front door projects. Front door projects meaning shelters, safe havens, day centers, outreach, possibly navigation. This is slowly getting rolled out. We have not retroactively gone back and added unless we were asked to by the city or building changes as part of the centralized fund initiative. So now you'll see going forward, anytime there is a shelter or a day center or an outreach project set up, you'll see a standard set of services. And some of these are financial. There's 5 categories. Within those categories is referrals and financial. Each of those has many underneath them. The one service that is the expectation, if we're shifting the expectation of every person coming into the front door is having a diversion conversation. It's called attempted service, diversion attempted. The expectation is that everybody's getting that one service at a minimum, and then you may see that there's other services connected. If you have City of Seattle contracts, you may have more information about what's required around shelters, day centers, and street outreach when it comes to diversion, and so your contract monitors would be who to ask about that. And if you don't have these services and you think you would like them or that you should, please reach out. Again, this is brand new the last couple months. We've been rolling it out as quickly as we can when we learned that an agency should have these services set up. The regional access points, the RAPs, if you are at agencies that also operates one of the RAPs, they have these services underneath them as well. Or, they're known as path to home in the system. These will also be reflected in an updated version of the outcomes report that's coming. So there will be a way to see some particular metrics around diversion services in the new outcomes report that should be released in the next several weeks. We'll send out these slides to everybody, and so these links will get you to these resources. But we wanted to make sure, because it is so new and because people have been coming to us wondering about the services, we wanted to make sure to include them here. So this is the way that the community is shifting to be able to track diversion instead of separately, but doing it underneath the shelter enrollment, underneath an outreach enrollment. There are some information about the full training that has happened. All Home, our continuum of care lead entity, has a bunch of stuff on their website. Some of you maybe have already been involved in some of these trainings. Some of you it might be new, so we just wanted to make sure to have these resources available. Great. And I referenced them. Here they are up here. Attempted case management, mediation, dispute resolution, referral services, which then has a number of them there, and then the financial assistance. These will be the only ones that obviously you can put in a dollar amount. There will be the fund source drop down, which you would see if it's appropriate. You could select that based on what you've been told you're tracking at your agency. So 2019 centralized fund would be one of those. Your agency may see other fund sources if you have other diversion funding streams. So as soon as we know about them and we're asked, we will add them to that for your agency. And then whoever's entering the data should find out what is required by the funder. We have no data standards, so we are, so this is for this part of the system. So we have those only as local standards. So they continue to be refined. Okay. I just wanted to go over the different categories. Any questions about the different categories? The question, sorry for the folks who couldn't hear, was do you only track it if it's been successful and if they're enrolled in your project? If they're not enrolled in your program, then you wouldn't be able to track that you tried to divert them. But it is appropriate to track it even if the diversion doesn't end up being something that happens, right? So it is attempted as the true meaning of the word. Because it's appropriate to say, yes, we tried to divert, but it didn't work out, so now we're serving them through these other means. And looking at the manuals will help if you go back to the links when we send this out, because there's some specific definitions that are in there as well. That's a good question. Okay, great. Then Danielle will take us through how to get some of this service data out of the system.
So we talked a little bit about how to enter services. We talked about program-specific services. Now we're going to talk about service reporting. Anyone have any questions before we move on to reporting? Okay. So I'm going to run through these fairly quickly-ish. A lot of these you'll see have a link to Spotlight. So they're ones that we have featured in our newsletter. When we send out this, we will send it out to everyone who is registered. It'll go out as a PDF and you'll be able to open that up and get more details if desired. This housing census report is a really helpful report, particularly if you're working for a night-by-night shelter. It shows you in the top report your maximum occupancy, so that's your units or beds. And then it shows you how many people have a midnight service on a given date. And you can run this by household or by individual. The service summary will give you a quick count of what services were provided by your program in a specific time period. One of the great things about this report is that it has drill downs. So if you click on any of these numbers, it will actually pull up for you a list of the clients that it's specifically looking at. So if you say at the top where it says education, we serve 2 clients. You're like, no, I know for a fact we serve 3. You can click on that 2. It will show you which 2 clients it's looking at, and then you can figure out what that 3rd client is and go back and make sure that the services are entered correctly. This does have a report spotlight, so when we send out the slides, you can click on this link and it will give you kind of more step-by-step information regarding the report. Any questions, sorry, before I move on, about the housing census report or the service summary report? Yes.
We have transitional housing. Where does that fall as far as counting households and time spent on a night-by-night?
Correct. So for like this housing census, this program-based housing census report, it will count, this number will be the number of people enrolled in your report period for each day. So this one isn't for a transitional housing program, for a permanent housing program, for an entry-exit shelter. This counts the number of enrollments, not the number of services. So this will count the number of services specifically for a night-by-night shelter. And the question was, what does this look at if it's not a night-by-night shelter? Program-linked service review. So this is a little bit to your question earlier about reporting and funding, and I realize it's a little blurry on the screen. This report is great because you can run it for a certain report period, and it will give you an Excel sheet of all of the services that you provided for clients in that report period, and it will give you a line per service. So it will give you your program, your client name, the name of the service. I think there's a service start and end, and then if there's any expenses, it will give you the expenses, dollar amount. So this is a great report if you need to do analysis on how much money was spent by your program in a certain amount of period. If you're looking at outreach contacts, this will give you a list of all of the outreach contacts in a given period. Any questions about the program service review?
It is one of my favorite reports.
It is one of my favorite reports as well.
It's just nice to be able to do a nice audit and see who's missing services that should have services.
So program funding source financial detail, this is another one if you work, if you have a program that requires that you enter funding. It will give you this nice breakdown, so it will give you a breakdown of the service, and then clients who receive that service, and then the amount. So this is a great one for checking to make sure services are entered if you're required to enter financial services. It also gives you nice totals of how much money you spent in that report period. Yeah. Any questions about the program funding source financial detail report? This is a very pretty, very helpful report. So this is a client level report. So if you want to run this report, you pull up the client profile page. There's a little printer icon over by the privacy shield. You click on it, this report should be one of your options. This, when we were talking about night-by-night services, when we were talking about outreach contact services, counseling towards documentation of homelessness, this is part of what we were talking about. So this report can function as part of documentation for client chronic homelessness. So if they go into a permanent housing program that requires chronic homelessness, this can count as some of that supporting documentation rather than needing to reach out to all of the agencies to confirm stays. Because it's data that is entered by a program in HMIS, this is not the full client chronic homelessness documentation, right? Because it has, it doesn't have that documentation of disability piece added in it, but this is a helpful tool. We have both a report spotlight and a guide on this report in particular, but it gives you this nice overview of client enrollments. This green and this green yes here will show you the period of time where the system determines based on enrollment, based on services, that a client was homeless in that month. You'll see these gray question marks. This is where the system can't quite determine, just based on either conflicting information or lack of information. So those will be opportunities to dig a little bit more. And then these red nodes are where a client, the system verifies that the client is not homeless, right? So for this particular client, this is the permanent housing program that has a move-in date. So anything after that is that client is not homeless. Any questions about this report? So Stacy referenced this report a couple of times. This report is in the process of being updated, but this is the Seattle County Program Outcomes Report. For those of you, specifically those of you who have City of Seattle funding, this is your report. We have an entire guide on the report. It takes you step by step what each section online means. It's available on our website, and when we send out the links, you'll be able to click on it. It's a great tool for seeing, even those of you who don't have funder requirements to use this report. It's an awesome resource to be able to see how many clients you've served, if you're meeting certain benchmarks. This report is also awesome because it has been done as well. So some of these fields like this one are percentage, you won't be able to click on that, but the ones that are just numbers, if you click on it, it will give you the list of the clients that it is looking at specifically. So for this one, it has 665 households served in this time period. If you click on that, it will list for you the head of household of all 665 of those households. Stacey mentioned earlier services. That comes into play here, like this day shelter one. This council daily visit is based on that day center attendance. Outreach, this count of enrollments with referrals. This is based on that service. So these are two where those services that we talked about come into play in the report itself. Yeah, great. So the question for the online audience was, what do we do if the numbers that pop up on our outcomes report don't match what we know to be reality? Who do we reach out to? I would say that we're a good starting point. One of the things you mentioned specifically was this measure, the household enrollments from homelessness during the report period. That question is actually pulled from your enrollment stream. That's the where did you stay the night prior question. So I feel free to reach out to me, feel free to reach out to our help desk, and we would be glad to help identify kind of what's going on and work with you to figure out what may be going on. Oftentimes it's just a misunderstanding of what the measure actually is and where it's going at. So we would be more than happy to dig in with you and figure out kind of what that is and where that misunderstanding. So the question comment was kind of a mismatch between what the report was pulling and what funders allowed. That would be a case, I believe, Stacey, feel free to jump in, but that would be a case to have that conversation with the funder, right? So the report pulls the HUD definition of homelessness.
But if your funder allows for imminent at risk, having kind of that conversation with the funder to say, you know, yes, this report shows this number, but here's the reality based on our funding allowance.
Yeah, and that particular example, that field, then HUD even removed, right, from the retired, the Cat 1, Cat 2 categorization from a lot of the screens, but some youth serving projects still fall under that. So it is not baked into this report at all. This report in particular is completely local custom. So the specs for it come from the city. And so we can help always, like Danielle say, help you understand exactly what the definition and what is getting counted. And that's true for any of the reports because we have the specs for any of the reports that have come from HUD as well. So yeah, that is a great point of when your project just doesn't fit into the categories being counted in a particular report. Somebody online does have the question of asking if agencies have changed from reporting this report from monthly to quarterly. And that would be a question for the funder and your contract monitor. This report can be run at any point and used by anybody. And some city-funded projects are required to submit it a particular time frame. And so just make sure that you know what that is. We are hesitant to speak for the funders, if you can.
Any other questions about the outcomes report? So there's a couple websites that I have alluded to that I want to make sure we talk about. So this is our King County webpage. This is where you can find our forms and guides. This is where the client de-identification protocol lives. This is where the release of information lives. For our report guides that we've referenced, this is where that lives. So we have one for the outcomes report, the path report, data quality report, and then that client homeless status report. We also recently have added a page, so under our training tab, we've added a page that gives you the links to all of our past recordings. And so this Anatomy of the APR is one that we've referenced today. We're also working on keeping this upcoming events ticker up to date, which is kind of a newer thing. So that will also be helpful. And this appears on any page that you are looking at. It will have upcoming events somewhere on that page. Another, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you go back to the forms and guides and scroll down, I want to show the HMIS manual or the HUD manuals. I just want to point this out. I mean, if you Google HMIS data standards, you'll find them. But I know we've been talking a lot about local funder requirements, and some of your agencies may not have certain funding streams for local requirements. By virtue of being a participating agency in HMIS, you are compelled to comply with HMIS data standards, even if you have no HUD funding directly. So just know that there is a full manual for the HMIS standards. There's a full data dictionary. If you or your colleagues don't understand what's being asked in a particular field or what's the definition, there's a definition. And so we're all required to comply with the data standards. And then on top of that, we may have other local service requirements that we've been talking a lot about here, like the city or diversion or something like that. So just wanted to make sure that we had the manuals linked here on the website. And if you Google HMIS data, you'll find them, no problem.
And then one more website. So this is for those of you who may be newer to HMIS or who are working with staff who are newer to HMIS. This is one of my favorite pages, and it's get.clarityhs.help. This is our help portal specifically for our software, and this is awesome if you forget how to, say you forget how to create a service. So it will take you to articles, they'll take you step by step. It will give you pretty pictures. Some of them have animations. So this is a great resource if you are newer to the software or you don't use it super frequently and forget how to do something. This will kind of take you step by step how to do things. Any other questions, comments? Okay, awesome. So currently you're here at Entering and Tracking Services in HMIS. A reminder that there is a quarterly leads meeting in April. An announcement went out directly to the agency leads. We do once a month offer online office hours, which is a place where you can come and ask any questions you may have. They're typically themed. I don't remember what the theme for April is.
It might just be a general refresher.
Perfect. And then to be determined in May, we will provide a training specifically around chronic homelessness in HMIS, documentation, all of those things. If there are not any other questions or concerns, have a great day, everyone.
I hope this was helpful.
Thank you, everyone, who joined us, and we will see you next time.